everyone. Welcome to our panel. Let's talk about boys. I'm Susie Dominic, the president of the Children's Media Association, and I wanted to welcome everyone tonight. We have an incredible panel of folks that we're so delighted to have together to share their knowledge, their expertise on this topic that we have all fallen in love with in the last 6 months since we started to build this report. But I'm going to do 15 seconds on CMA because I know we have some folks joining us tonight that are new to CMA. And we are an organization that is 100% ran by volunteers. We consider ourselves an industry organization, and our goal is to inspire, connect, and share knowledge, which is what we're obviously doing tonight. So if you're interested, check out our website, join. We do panels most weeks, and we do in-person events as well. And then we have big keynotes events that we do twice a year. Lots of information, lots of ways to support you throughout your career. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Eva, and you can introduce everyone.
Thanks, Susie. Hi, everyone. I'm Eva. I'm a senior coordinator on our Research and Insights team. Our team has been diving deep into how kids and family media represents different identities. And currently in part 1 of our 2-part series on gender, we're zooming in on boys. So how they're currently portrayed, how we can move beyond the usual tropes to reflect their true and full emotions, aspirations, and complex identities. And along with this really enriching discussion we're about to have, I will just mention we're excited to launch our latest playbook. So this is packed specifically to boys' representation in media, packed with specific insights, real voices from parents, and actionable guidance in those shaping content in this space. So that playbook is now live on our website. Don't go away just yet. Maybe right after this, go ahead and check it out. And special thanks to our co-moderators, Kareem and Derek, who I'll introduce in a second, for their contributions and feedback and support on our report. So just to pull back the curtain a little bit, our Research Insights team is entirely made up of women. And in that sense, it's meaningful and useful to bring a female perspective into this work. But at the same time, I know I've been sitting with, and I know a number of people on my team have been sitting with how to square the progress we want to make here with the ongoing work of the representation of girls in media. And ultimately, I think it comes down to that it's not a zero-sum game, right? A rising tide that really does lift all boats. And there are qualitatively different strategies to how we can improve media representation of boys and of girls. So with that in mind, that was a zoom out. Let's zoom back into boys. And let me go ahead and introduce our incredible co-moderators for our discussion tonight. First up, we have Baird. He's a youth media strategist, author of the Gen Z Frequency, and creator of BeingMe, a teen mental health podcast. He's worked with Disney, Facebook, and Warner Brothers to help shape how boys and young people are represented across media and on stage. And we have Dr. Kareem Edouard. He's an assistant professor of learning technologies at the School of Education, Drexel University, and co-director of the Informal Learning Linking Engineering, Science, and Technology Lab, aka the ILLIS Lab. He works to motivate Black students to pursue STEAM learning through culturally relevant informal STEM programs. And he's a creative producer on the PBS Kids show, Workout Wombats. Now to introduce our lovely panelists as well, we have Dr. Kevin Clark. He's a children's media producer who's worked with studios and companies, as well as conducting research on technology and media for STEM learning. Kevin was previously director of preschool animation at Netflix and professor of learning technologies at George Mason University. And he's currently a program director at the National Science Foundation. We have Chris Bell, Dr. Chris Bell. He's the president of Creativity Partners, LLC, and the executive in residence in the College of Media, Communication, and Information at the University of Colorado Boulder. Dr. Bell specializes in studying how race, class, and gender intersect in different forms of children's media. We have José Campi Portaluppi. He's the director of communications and advocacy with Equimundo. He leads Equimundo's external affairs team and conducts narrative shift work and storytelling on a global scale. And last but not least, we have Dr. Michael Reichert. He's a psychologist, researcher, and writer. He's the executive producer of the Center for the Study of Boys and Girls' Lives, a research collaborative at the University of Pennsylvania. And he's a supervising psychologist at the Haverford School. And in his clinical practice, he specialized in work with boys, men, and their families. So without further ado, let's dive in. We have some specific questions to our panelists, but feel free to pop any questions you might have into the chat for a bit of Q&A at the end. So I want to start with the big question. Why boys and why now? So in a time where we are rightly focused, right, on gender equality and female empowerment, some may wonder, maybe some folks who are here tonight, why boys deserve dedicated attention. So we'd love to open up the floor to any and all of you with your perspectives on why this conversation is not only relevant, but essential today.
I'll start.
I think I'll go ahead.
Great.
Go ahead, Derek.
From a mental health perspective, boys are hurting, but most of it's invisible. A lot of the issues that impact girls in social media also impact boys, but we don't really talk about it. And also there's a public health crisis around boys and suicide because boys are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than girls. So these are things that we need to be more open about and talk about so that our boys aren't suffering in silence.
I also think it's important to think about boys not being a monolith. Most of the time when we think of boys, and particularly when we talk about boys within a media space, there's just kind of stereotype, archetype framing of what a boy looks like. And particularly this work that we're looking to do, and even with this panel, is to make sure that we tease out that there are nuances in how different groups of boys not only being seen by society, being treated, and then it also leads directly into the discourse of mental health and better development.
And one thing I'd like to add is when we talk about boys, we have to remember that boys are in a society with girls and women. And so helping them be productive, well-adjusted, and positive human beings is a good thing. And so as much as we want to make sure that girls are involved in the room and proactive, we also need to do the same thing for boys.
And I'd say I jump in and just say, because we can be unapologetic about caring about boys and continue to hold space in our hearts and minds for girls as well. It's at Equimundo, we always say it's not a zero-sum game, and the zero-sum game mentality, we believe, leads to a dangerous path. We currently see boys underachieving in the educational space in more than 100 countries around the world. We've conducted research under the banner of the State of American Men, where we've seen that especially the youngest in the country are saying that they feel that no one really knows them well. From 4 out of 10 from 18 to 23, granted not boys, have reported suicidal ideation thoughts in the last 2 weeks. And so we believe that we need to care about boys in the same way that Kevin said, because they do not live in isolation. And the solution to the problems that we're seeing in the world are to be tackled in a relational manner. And therefore, we need to care about boys because we need to care about girls as well.
Totally agree. I think it's also pretty clear that we have, as a society, we have severely lowered our expectations of boys. And boys can be so much more than what we expect them to be. I think we've really pigeonholed boys into one growth path developmentally. And by putting those walls around boys, we're not letting them experience the full range of their own possibilities. I think we've shackled boys in a lot of ways that are sad, to be quite honest.
Maybe what I would add, why boys, why now? I think there's never been I'm going to be grandiose here, in all of human history, a better time to be a boy or to be raising a boy. Because I think we're finally taking seriously developmental outcomes that have been around for 100 years. We're actually allowing ourselves to apply a scientific lens to those developmental outcomes that we've normalized for generations. And we're saying, this is not great. Boys come into the world. My grandson 8 years ago came into this world, and he and all boys think we know what we're doing as we design a boyhood for them. And the truth of the matter is that the boyhood we've designed has always been sacrificial. There's always been routine casualties and losses. And I think our appetite for that has really diminished. We're really getting serious about what do we need to understand so that this can produce better, more reliable outcomes.
Thank you all. Derek, I can throw it to you if you'd like to ask your first question, or I can hit it up if you'd like.
Sure. So our first question is from Michael. And the question is, what are some of the most persistent stereotypes that you see in media representation of boys and men? Just an easy question.
Yeah. And 1 minute, right? Yeah. Derek, I've thought about this for 40 years in the field of boyhood studies. And I think the thing I would say is that there's an underlying archetype that continues to guide our representations of boys, the way that parents parent boys in their homes, the way that teachers teach them in schools. And that archetype is of the feral child, the human that is more animal than human. So that in households, for example, we know that boys receive the bulk of physical discipline, including being physically punished. In schools, boys are thought to be autonomous, not needing a relational connection in terms of learning. My partner and I did 4 global studies of boys' education, and we asked boys, a sample of boys and a sample of teachers, what's working. Teachers answered, in very technical details about the design of their lessons and so forth, the educational theories they were following. Boys answered resoundingly, poetically, about their teachers, the personalities of their teachers, the degree to which their teachers were warm and caring. And we were drawn to the finding that boys are relational learners by the boys themselves. What was shocking about that was we didn't know it. Teachers with 30 years in the trenches didn't anticipate how clearly boys would identify themselves as relational learners. The archetype of boys as feral, not needing caring, not needing protection, not needing relationship. I think that's the myth underlying the representations that I see.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else on the panel have a follow-up or thoughts?
I also want to say quickly, as we also think about, again, we're disaggregating demography and thinking about, particularly in schools, how we punish, that Black and brown boys bear the heavy weight of this. When you look at punitive punishment, suspensions, expulsion, you have this group of boys who are sometimes aged past their actual ages. They're held in such difficult conditions for how they can express themselves. And I've heard even more granular discussions about the amount of time that's missed by Black and brown boys, particularly based on these punitive discussions, can be sometimes half of the school year. So that's also goes to further Michael's discussion, and the framing of it is really thinking about how we treat boys, and then also disaggregate the conversation on the types and the kinds of boys that we have these discussions with.
Well, I want to add, we're talking about boys, and as Kareem mentioned, boys means different things depending on your demography, right? So for Black and brown kids, you're a boy until you're about 8. Then you're seen as a man, as somebody to be feared, right? And so I think we need to keep that in mind when we talk about boys and them having to be out in the world. When, my son, when he was 10, I had to sit him down and tell him, you're 10 years old now. Somebody's going to be scared of you, period. And that changes how he moves in the world. And we have to come to grips with that.
Yes, thank you. So let's move on to our next question, which is for Jose. And a lot of your work happens to be around the idea of the man box. So could you explain to everybody what you mean by the man box and how that impacts boys and how that's often repeated in media?
Sure thing. I can try. I just like to say what a privilege it is to share this space with all of you. Especially I've been Michael's fan since I came across him, so it's sort of a privilege to be next to him in this space. I'd also like to say that I come to this not as an expert in masculinities. I have historically worked with women-led organizations and representation of LGBTQI population. And after a long time of feeling like I was not necessarily seeing the progress that I wanted, I got this call from this crazy organization that told me, "Hey, we are working with men and boys." And I was like, "Okay, but for what?" And they're like, "Well, for gender equality." I was like, "Oh, okay, this is a thing." And this is sort of the other side of the spectrum. In that sense, Equimundo, among other thought leaders in the space, helped coin this idea of a man box or a boy box, as you could see it, to try and summarize what are different principles that we traditionally associate with the most rigid versions of manhood. Basically, what we're saying is that yes, this rigid version of manhood or the man box hurts everyone in the world. We do not go into the zero-sum game of who suffers more because we do not feel that that is productive. But we see and we know, especially when you've been a boy and when you're socialized as a boy, as a kid, that man box hurts us all. When we talk about the man box, we talk about 7 different principles. So self-sufficiency, acting tough, a component of physical attractiveness, heterosexuality as the norm and homophobia, hypersexuality, aggression and control, and other rigid masculine gender roles. What we are saying is that growing within that man box is harmful for us all. And what the solution that we devise then is to be able to break out of the man box, which is very, very hard. And for some of us, it takes the rest of our life to try and deconstruct it and try to unlearn it. That is exactly why we believe that we need to work with boys with a very simple insight. It's easier to learn than to unlearn. It's easier to construct in a healthier way than to deconstruct. Right now, for example, we're exploring the creation of a video game that allows for kids within the Roblox platform to go, like, to be trapped within the man box. And for them, in order to escape the man box, one of the main conditions is that they have to do it with a friend. Just to say that in order even to come out of the man box, the only way that you can do it is yes, relational, is yes with others, and yes with the support of the community that you need to build. So I hope that sort of summarizes and explains what we mean by that concept.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And I'd say I worked with a mental health company, and we went to a lot of these gaming platforms and talked about mental health resources for boys. What if a boy's in crisis? Building in wellness by design features into platforms. And it was always met with just, what? Do boys need that? We're doing that for the girls on the bullying, but boys don't get bullied. So, I mean, it's like thinking about how these systems and how these platforms also impact boys. Because right now, most of the trust and safety features are built around only supporting girls. So we're going to move to Kevin, since we're clipping along here. How well do you think kids and family media is doing at balancing authentic portrayals of boys from different abilities, genders, sexuality, races, all the things?
All the things. I think part of the challenge is there tends to be a risk-averse nature in media, right? We don't want to take a chance on anything. We want to go with a sure thing. And that stifles creativity, that stifles authenticity. And I think when you begin to look at creating content specifically for boys and being authentic for that target audience, I think you have to have a recipe. And so the best way that I can explain it is when you're using a recipe, you have a clear outcome, right? Usually it's the picture, right, of the food. And so we have to know what we're looking for in certain kids programming. Know our target audience, know the content, know what we want in the end. And then we need to know the right ingredients, right? We need to know what should go into this. So who's in the writer's room? Who are the consultants? Who are the decision makers? And then once we have those ingredients, we need to know what the processes of combining those ingredients are, right? How do you mix it? How do you sift it? And does that keep the authenticity still intact? And then the last two things are, what are the tools that you're using? So, are you doing 2D cell animation, or are you doing computer generated animation? Because that's going to impact the processes, and that's going to impact the ingredients, right? And then lastly, the decisions. And this is, I think, one of the most important aspects of the executive, the role that the executive plays in this, and that's who makes the decision, not only at the show level, but then within the organization. Who decides we're going to greenlight that show? Who decides we're going to give this show a bigger budget than that show? And I think the closer you can get to the outcome that you want, the better it is. So you need to make sure you have the right ingredients, meaning the right people in the room, the right resources, and that you do the processes the right way. If it says cream together these ingredients and you sift it, you're going to get a different outcome for all you bakers, right? And so I think it's important that we keep that in mind, because we often think, oh, we got one writing team, they can do all our shows. No, they can't, unless they have the lived experience for all the shows that you want to do. So I think it's important that media companies and creators in general make sure they have the right recipe.
Excellent. Our next questions for everybody on the panel. I'll answer first, and then I'll turn it over to Michael, and then you can bounce it to somebody else. But the question is, what was a piece of media that shaped your view of masculinity as a kid or teen? Which this stumped me for about 25 minutes this afternoon. But I came down to the conclusion that the media that I consumed was a mirror of my lived reality and my family life in a lot of ways. I grew up in a military Marine Corps family, hoorah, go Marines, in a very conservative religion. So with the patriarchal bent to it. So the media we consumed as a family was kind of a confirmation bias of this is what men are like. So it was very masculine, Rocky, Balboa beating the crap out of people, Top Gun, very macho kind of content. So, that shaped kind of what I thought. But then, because I'm old and grew up in the 80s, I was a teen in the 80s. So then I'm like seeing that, and then I'm seeing Boy George and all those guys, and the androgyny movement in music. So it was kind of like, okay, what's a guy? What's a guy supposed to be like? So that's my answer. I'm interested to hear what Michael has to say.
Yeah. Also stumped there, Derek. But the thing that came to my mind was how much I responded viscerally to stories like Huckleberry Finn, including recently the rewrite by Percival Evers, Huck. But the story of somebody, a young boy, having adventures, being on his own, being close to nature, having a buddy, a close friend. In Huck's case, it was Jim. Looking out for each other, taking care of each other, having close calls. I think somehow that resonated for me. The hero's journey, the romanticized hero's journey. I think stories like that. And I'll pass it to Chris.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I sit here and I'm listening, and I don't know that a single piece of media really influenced my ideas about masculinity, but I can say, like, without a shadow of a doubt, the most influential person on my idea of manhood growing up, both as a kid and both as a child and as a teenager, was LeVar Burton. Between reading Rainbow and Next Generation,
Yeah.
Star Trek, and this understanding of like there was another way to be a man in the world, like that you could be smart and gentle and kind, and that science was cool, and that reading was cool, and that it didn't make you any less of a man. He never felt unmasculine to me in any way. Like he always just felt cool, and like that's the kind of person I want to be. And I really do feel like I patterned a lot of my path to manhood through wanting to be like him when I grew up. And so, yeah, I think that was really the most influence on me.
Love that answer.
I'll bounce it to Kareem since he looks like he wants to jump in.
I'll give it a compression because I'm like young old. Like I'm old, but I just look young, and you'll understand by my answer. James Evans. So for me, I grew up in the 80s with only 3 channels. So I connected with all the 70s and the 60s kids. And James Evans, to me, was that conversation of what masculinity looks like. A brother that has to work hard to keep that food and the lights on. And it also is this tension, and it goes back to kind of Derek's framing and asking the question to Dr. Clark about people that are in the room. But then you think of who created the show, right? And who were the writers of the show, and how these white writers and creators were trying to tap into the zeitgeist of discussing what family realities were, particularly Black family realities. So for me, James Evans and then James Evans Jr., JJ, right, gave me this duality of what masculinity looks like on television. And then if I fast forward a little bit, I end with Jamal Ghostwriter. So now you're having this conversation about what it looks like to not only embrace language, but then looking at language as a historical lens. And it's cool to then want to learn more about yourself in a deeper context. That's all. I'll leave it there.
Kevin, do you want to jump
All right,
in?
so I'll go. So I have 2 answers. One is Furious Styles from Boys in the Hood. Lawrence Fishburne. When I saw that movie, that's the father you want to have, right? That's gonna take care of you, don't take no mess, but it's gonna love you, right? And in that same vein, I recently, probably about 2 years, a year and a half ago, saw a play that to me was the epitome of male of masculinity and in terms of representation. It's a play called For Black Boys Who Considered Suicide When the Hue Gets Too Heavy. It was in London, right? And I hope it comes to the U.S. And it's based on the Tashaka Shange book, 1975 book, for colored girls who considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. But what it did do is that it took 6 Black men from a variety of perspectives, and they revealed themselves. And it was just the most amazing play I have seen outside of Hamilton. And so I think that for me showed me what is possible, right? It's a Black playwright. He put all of this stuff in this play. And if you ever get a chance to go see it, I think it is one of the best representations of Black masculinity.
Thank you.
I think I'll go next. I didn't grow up in the States, so I grew up in Ecuador, where I'm from, in Latin America, and so there weren't many Latino boys in media when I was growing up. There was also not very little, if any, queer Latino characters in media for me to try to model myself after. But I was a very weird kid. I didn't have many friends, so I was very much into Lord of the Rings, and like I can admit now that I learned how to write in Elfish for a while, so I was a bit of a geek. And in Lord of the Rings, there's a story that you can take the story of the hero adventure, but you can also take the story from the point of friendship. And so the character of Samwise Gamgee, who just loves with his entire heart, and for the duration of the whole trilogy, just keeps caring for everyone else in his immediate surrounding. I think I was sort of terrified of other boys at the time because they felt quite aggressive and they felt quite different from what I was, and I was scared that they would be able to identify me as different. But Sam was unapologetically different. Sam was unapologetically loving, and I think for me, it showed me that being a boy can look in different ways.
Very cool. All right, next question.
Great, thank you all. And Chris, you kind of mentioned about what it means to be another man in the world, or another way to be a man in the world, and providing that. We were wondering, in your experience, how do boys respond to, quote unquote, non-traditional male characters? So maybe characters that show their emotions, maybe are nurturing roles, maybe have queer identities. How do boys, respond to these various identities that maybe don't fit the typical stereotypical mold?
Well, okay, so there's two ways to answer this. There's sort of the way that I will answer it, but I'll give my sort of cynical answer first, which is where would they possibly have seen those? But I think that boys tend to seek out the things that they need. And what I mean by that is, one of the things we forget in this conversation is that the borders of masculinity for boys are policed by men. And so boys are often given, children do not have consumer control. So boys are given things by men in their lives that corral them into particular kinds of masculinity. And so boys aren't given the tools to experience their full range of emotions. And so then they seek those things out in spaces where their fandom, where their attachment, where their interest becomes quite literally transgressive. Where they are fans of things that are not supposed to be for them. And so the interesting thing historically about where boys are getting things like nurturing and empathy and emotional attachment and those kinds of things are often in spaces that are quote unquote for girls. Because they are not mirrored in things that are for boys, because things that are for boys also carry with it giant bags full of things that not every boy attaches to. So you've got, this thing that's supposedly about friendship, but how we express that friendship is by getting together and going punch other people in the face. Or like we want to work together towards a goal, but that goal is demolishing the other team, and so on and so forth. It's always hand in hand with this thing that is quite frankly distasteful to some boys in our society. And so they do seek things out. I wrote pretty extensively at the time about the phenomenon of boys who were very interested in My Little Pony friendship as magic. And people were like, well, why would boys be seeking out this thing that are for 8 and 9-year-old girls? And I'm like, because nothing in their life teaches them how to be a friend. We don't make that show for boys. We only make that show for girls. And so boys have to play in that space and then immediately are punished for being in that space, not by the girls in that space, but by men who see boys in that space, because the borders for masculinity for boys are policed by men. So that's sort of a long and winding road there. Your question was about how boys respond to non-traditional male characters, and my response to that is, where would they possibly see those?
But can I jump in though? Because Kareem, we talked about this yesterday. I think a good example of where boys could look is the new show Forever, because I think there's great modeling there, there's great parenting there, there's great friendships there. And that's the first one that really broke through for me, where you're seeing something really different. And I think it's a very special show. So.
Yeah, my counter for that is that's also a show about sex, and that becomes problematic for many parents in having conversations with their children, which is a whole different panel for a whole different.
Agreed. We actually had that internal discussion with the team. Should we include it? Should we not? Just because of the, the sex tape in there, or real, whatever it was. But yeah, sorry, even take it away. Or where are we now?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, and thinking about creating these and being in the writer's room, Kevin, you mentioned, and I still can't get out of my head, if you cream ingredients and you sift it, it's different. I want to put that on a pillow. I want to embroider that. But thinking about behind this, in the writer's room, how, if at all, do you think the gender dynamics in that, in a writer's room and executive teams and productions, shape the stories that we see portrayed about boys and men?
So I think part of it is that they operate based on slates. They said, we need a show about with vehicles. We need a show with this. And our lives and boys' lives are not like that. They're not unidimensional, right? A boy will play with a truck and an action figure, and and so it should be about play. It should be about what is being done. And one of the examples that I think is a book that I read recently is Jason Reynolds' Stunt Boy in the Meantime. It's a great book because the lead character, a boy, has a great friendship and a great platonic friendship with a girl, right? And he goes through all of the emotions. He explains, he talks about his emotions. And part of the challenge is when you ask somebody what that book is about or to categorize that book, they won't say, oh, it's a boy book, or they'll say it's a YA book. But if you want to make it into a show, they'll be like, okay, where does it fall in the categories? And it doesn't. It's just good. And so I think what executives need to start doing is just make good stuff. I know you got a slate to fill, but if it's good, it's gonna work. And if it's authentic, people are gonna connect to it. So that's I think one of the barriers that needs to be kind of broken, is that we need to get away from these categories and forcing shows and concepts into boxes.
Mm.
And I would just add real quickly that on the digital side, a lot of the content developed in, mental health apps and educational apps doesn't usually have any male perspective baked in. I mean, I have been at mental health conferences where I've heard panelists say, well, the way to fix boys is to make them more like girls.
Oh.
And no, we need to, develop content for boys that helps boys, that boys relate to, that boys will want to engage with, that will allow them to be emotionally vulnerable without feeling like they're less of a man for doing so.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I comment on Derek's point there? One of the findings in the most recent State of American Men's survey that Equimundo, José's organization, conducted, found that 65%, 2 out of 3 young men, 18 to 23, believe no one cares about men. It's not just the absence of seeing yourself reflected in an accurate and generous way in media. I think it happens in interpersonal transactions in classrooms, sports teams. I think this notion that young men have, no one really knows me, is an accurate reflection of how we actually can't see boys and men very clearly. Whether, and I think that's true across the board, across all the ethnic groups. I think at different intersections of identity, it's compounded by other social stresses. But I think in general, we have a hard time seeing boys and men's humanity.
And I'd say there that one of the biggest dangers of boys and men perceiving that no one cares about them is that while they were perceiving that no one cared about them, the voices that did say, I care about you, I see you, I'm here for you, were very harmful voices that were trying to monetize from their suffering and anguish. And so Wade was saying, I see you. Jordan Peterson was saying, I see you. And some of those voices who were there have been able to co-opt the attention of those young boys and young men. And I think that it is not too late for us to come and say, we see you, we hear you, and we're not trying to sell you anything. We actually are here because we want what's best for you.
That's such an interesting point. I say this sort of observationally, because people who know me know that like I'm girl dad number one. Like I have a daughter, and my daughter is like the most important thing in my entire life. But one of the things that I have noticed over the course of her childhood is the way in which the pendulum has shifted all the way to this other side, to where we are now severely over-indexed on shows and characters and things that are for girls, and the things that are for boys have been really shoved to the side or into this really small box. And inside of that small box, what boys are learning is that, and again, this goes back to my original comment of boys have been, our expectations of boys have been severely lowered, in that boyhood and manhood is seen as expendable in a lot of the media that they are given to consume, in that male characters shoot and fight and die, and they go on without me, and all of these tropes that we have around male characters and around media for boys, that teach them that like aspirationally they should want to become soldiers, or they should want to become for frontline people who put their lives on the line for others, and that's what it means to be brave, and all of these connected pieces that when you get down to the bottom of those things, what it really means is boys and men are expendable for society as a whole. And so, of course, boys grow up thinking nobody cares about them because nobody's taking their feelings into account other than a feeling of bravery and standing in front of bullets for others. And I think we can't discount that's not happening in a vacuum. That's not happening by accident. That is a message actively being told to boys on a daily basis.
So what I like to do is ask a question to the entire group. And I want you all to think about particularly examples that you can provide where you think where media has hindered or helped emotional development. And there's a couple of ways to approach this. When you look at the disaggregation of how media platforms are set up, right? So you have the Netflixes, and then you have the YouTubes, and then you have content that's being taken in by social platforms like TikTok. And then you ask yourself, with these examples, how are they impacting or how are they help shaping a larger conversation, particularly when you think of the effects of the manosphere? And I want to kind of frame that in this way. So you look at, again, with disaggregation of media, where a show like Adolescence presents itself, where it talks about particularly the growth of a particular young man on this show, and then the impact of how the manosphere is framed. And then myself and Susie, we had a discussion where particularly this show talks about white male fragility within these spaces, but we don't necessarily talk about other males, right? As sometimes when we look at white males in these contexts, we say it's a system problem, but with other males, particularly Black boys, brown boys, it's something that's innate in them. So then it becomes a very triggering conversation. So with that kind of opening up, and you're thinking about a show like Forever, where Wood Harris's character really is providing this opportunity to share this framing of what fatherhood is, as what's alluded by Dr. Bell. I wanted to kind of open it up for a discussion to think about, what are some examples that we as folks who are watching this can think of as far as like good and bad images to really kind of frame that. Two, the different varying platforms like a TikTok or YouTube that are really giving these access from a different viewpoint, and then also how that is also framing the manosphere conversation, and then finally, how does fatherhood fit into this? I open it up to the entire panel.
That you pack a wallop in your questions, Kareem. I can answer part of that. I'm sure I don't remember all of what you were asking us to comment on, but part of my palette of things I do as a psychologist is I lead an emotional literacy program for high school boys, 50, 60 young men, ages 16, 17, 18, and I've been doing it for 35 years. And over the course of that time, I've seen that program migrate from the fringes of the school to the absolute center of the school. The young men describe it as their favorite program in the school, not because I'm so great, hardly. It's really about the fact that during that period of time, what's changed is young men now value their emotional health as much as, if not more than, their physical health, for the first time in some of the surveys that are tracking this. And I'm telling you this by way of saying that shows, movies that strike me like Good Will Hunting or even Officer and a Gentleman, where the character, the protagonist, breaks down in the company of someone that is leaning in on them, stripping them of their pretense, bringing them down to their gut honest level, and they build themselves back up again. I think those kinds of themes really resonate with young men today. That's what I see in the program I work with. And I think that themes that echo that kind of journey, sort of, coming to terms with, reckoning with your struggles and finding support and caring and honesty in the process of transforming yourself into a better person. I think those themes are really resonant. I don't know if I hit any of those questions at all.
Yeah, you hit all those questions. You hit all of them. You're perfect. And then also too, just opening it up. So how does, when you're looking at social media platforms, kind of leak into this? And then Jose, I'll tap you in for that particular framing of it.
Yeah, I'd say that on my end, thinking of content that I think can be quite powerful, I would mention a video game that we've encountered recently, and I'm putting there the link in the comment section, but it's called Unravel and Unravel 2. And Unravel tells the story of this doll made out of yarn called Yarny, and Yarny is the embodiment of love. And it's a doll that starts to unravel while you play. And one of the things that it does is, as you play on, you start connecting the memories of a family together. And on the second version of Unravel, they introduce a component which is called cooperative gaming that makes it so that you have to play with another person. You tie your yarn to that other person's yarn, and then in order to move and advance through the game, you have to do it together. When I saw the trailer the first time, I cried. When I saw it the second time, I cried again. When I brought my Nintendo to the Equimundo office and we all played together, I think we cried as well. But I do believe that there's a power that can happen, especially in the world of video games, which I think online games and games in general offer a different avenue to the media that maybe we grew up with. I think with the media that grew up with, we had the stories and we had the characters, and that was about it. There's wonderful organizations that have been doing research on this space for a really long time through content analysis and narrative analysis. That my dream job was to work with one of them, either the Gina Davis Institute or the Norman Lear Institute or GLAAD at some point in life. And with online gaming, you have that. You have characters and you have stories, but at the same time, you have gameplay. So how you play affects the way in which you consume the story, whether you play alone or whether you play with others. There's pro-social gaming components within gaming. So even when the story might be a bit problematic or a character might not be perfect, there may be the chance that you eat pizza and you give pizza away to a friend in order to revive them and in order to help them. So you have the performance of identity as well, because you do not just see the character, you embody the character and you advance the story. You have the social component of playing with others and being able to speak with others. You have the social media dimension as well that gets added to this via Twitch, via Discord. You have the sense of accomplishment when you finish the game. You have the social validation that comes out of being good or moderately good at the game. And then you have the industry side of it, which has to do with the world of esports, the leagues, advertisers in general. This is all to say that when you talk about gaming as a media, which is the most popular media nowadays for kids, and especially for boys, in Roblox, you have 80 million kids that are playing every day. And in Fortnite, you have 30 million people playing Fortnite every day, mostly boys. It means that there's many avenues for danger, yes, but there's also many avenues for change and for intervention. So you have interventions like the one that Gina Davis Institute has done with their GDI playbook to be able to create better characters and better stories. You also have what Thrive, like the Digital Thriving Playbook has produced as a guide to pro-social components. And some of the efforts that we're doing, when Derek was saying that it's very hard to go into the gaming system and say, hey, we need to care about boys, what we're doing on Equimundo's end is try to bypass that by creating the games ourselves. And it's a challenge, and it's difficult to find funding, and it's tricky because it's also that the game that a nonprofit designs is not necessarily the game that the kids want to play. So we're trying to unlearn a bit of our NGO persona in order to be able to get there and do it in a better way.
So I'll comprect this for a round robin. I'll start with Derek, go to Dr. Clark, and then make our way to Dr. Bell. So in taking Hillary's question about representation, I wanted to really ask this question, starting with Derek. When we look at, again, talking about not the archetype of just one type of boy, but really the voices of many. And I really welcomed your conversation around Indigenous boys, and I wanted to give some space to have that conversation. And then also for the other two to really think about, even for you, particularly when you're hoping to see other representations of boys across media and the framing of boys when it comes to Hillary's question. Derek, what is, starting with you, just the framing of Indigenous boys? How do you see their representation, particularly in media, and their stories and their voices are being absent or not being fully present in media today?
Wow. Well, I'll say in my work in teen mental health, one of the things I did was which boys are not being served by anybody, and that's who I'm going to make sure that, every year I was like, this year I'm focusing on Indigenous boys, because boys and girls, Native youth, because you don't see them anywhere. I lived in Utah for a long time, and Navajo Nation takes up a significant part of the state. So I had a lot of opportunity to interact with Navajo youth. In my book, I made a point of having a case study on how you serve LGBTQ Native youth, Two-Spirit youth. So, I mean, a lot of it's just really making the effort to help them be seen. I didn't know what to do, so I went to Healthy Native Youth and said, hi, I want to make sure that we're representing Native youth. Come on our podcast, talk about, what are the struggles of Native youth, and how can we help them? And we had talked to somebody that was on the show, Reservoir Dogs, which is a really major milestone.
Reservation dogs. Reservoir dogs is a whole different thing.
Yes, yes, you're right. Hey, thank you, Dr. Chris. So I think it's just really just making the effort. Disabled boys are another group of boys that are virtually invisible, including intellectual disabilities. Rural boys was another area that I'd like to focus on, because they really are pigeonholed as a certain type of person. I did a teen advisory board, and we had rural youth on, and it was really interesting to hear them talk about mental health versus kids that are from San Francisco and New York. It was a whole different conversation. So I think it's just making the space for it. And I was at a Joan Gans Cooney webinar this morning for Wellness by Design, And it reminded me of an important thing that that they were talking about in the context of building digital apps for kids and teens. But it's definitely something that needs to be applied to media, which is we're not here just to make sure that kids aren't harmed or that there's negative things. We need to amplify the good things so that those things are in front of them so that they can model the good things instead of just being told this is bad. And so then the last thing I would add is, we can't demonize boys. A lot of the conversation lately has been around demonizing boys of color, indigenous boys, all the boys, Latino boys. So let boys be messy, find ways to support them, listen to them. They're not little adults. They're individuals that have thoughts and want to be seen.
And I guess and I appreciate that. I guess for Dr. Clark and Dr. Bell, I'll kind of like sandwich it together because I still really love Hillary's question. So I grew up in the moment when UPN, WB had Jamie Foxx, Martin. They were really tailoring and building representation of particularly Black men and brown men. And then you had shows like Recess. You had the famous Jet Jackson, rest in peace, Silverstone. But like you had these shows where the platforms weren't afraid to build and create content that really showed a diverse representation of boys. So Dr. Clark, for you, what is this moment now that we have where we can look back and how these early network opportunities were there to create this diverse look? What is this opportunity now with, again, the disaggregation of platforms to be able to do this kind of move forward again?
Well, to extend my recipe metaphor, more people need to cook, and you say this all the time. We need to cook. There needs to be more platforms because people have the content, right? But there's there are gatekeepers who decide what's going to be on this streamer, what's going to be on this network. When the people making those decisions are not the people closest to the food, right? They have an idea of what it should be, and they have the resources, so they're able to get it on. And so I think streamers like Quele TV, which is a streamer focused toward the African diaspora, there needs to be more stuff like that. And so I think let them cook. Everybody needs to cook, and then we all can eat.
Dr. Bell, close us out.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to combine a few things, not just Hillary's question, but also what you were talking about earlier, and also what Jennifer and Jillian both asked in the chat as well, which is sort of what's missing, what's the hole, what do we want to see more of, what kinds of things that I grew up with, what I want to see now, and so on and so forth. And I have sort of two answers to that. Number one, it is my life's goal. If you are someone on the chat and you have rights or whatever, please shoot me an email or whatever. But I want to dust off Encyclopedia Brown. It's like, it's a thing that was so important to me as a kid. And I love the idea of a boy who just solves mysteries, just solves problems, doesn't fight, doesn't have to, run and jump and play. It's a boy who is smart and like observant and uses deductive reasoning to solve problems. And I think that would be fantastic. It certainly appealed to me as a kid. It felt like a thing written specifically for me, and I really enjoyed that. And the other thing, and this is a thing that myself, Dr. Edouard, Dr. Clark have our fingers in, which is the idea of shows for boys that center friendship on boys' terms. Shows for boys that center friendship on boys' terms. Because what ends up happening is, as Derek pointed out, I believe it was Derek pointed this out, you get into rooms where people are like, oh, well, the way to make boys better is to just make them more like girls. And that's not how boy friendships work. Girls center their friendships around relationship itself. Boys center friendship around activity first. So girls can just get together and talk. Boys don't do that. Boys get together and do a thing, and that thing anchors their friendship. They get together and they ride bikes. They get together and they throw dirt at each other down in the ditch, down the street. Like, they get together and they do a thing, and that's how they negotiate their friendship. It's how they learn how to cooperate. It's how they learn how to support each other. It's how they learn how to be empathetic or how to put themselves in someone else's shoes. They can't do that in the same way that girls can just through words. Boys need activity. And so how do we center shows about friendship for boys around activity where that activity isn't violence? And I think that's the holy grail of 2025. Can you put together a show where boys get to be friends, where they don't use that friendship to harm other people? That's the goal. That's the gold standard right now.
I love that. All right, Eva, last question. Fire round.
Certainly, yes. We can do a fire round, a headline. Maybe what's one insight that each of you hope people listening will take away from this conversation? I know it might be tricky to put into a headline. I guess we can do our best. Let me start us off with Jose.
Okay, that's not scary at all. I would say that whenever I talk about media nowadays, and especially about the component of gaming, there's a lot of people who dunk on gaming quite easily and quite a bit. I'm a gamer myself, and I grew up playing video games. The first time I played a video game was an Atari, so you can imagine how old I was. And it was with my dad, and so it allowed me to bond in what was a tricky relationship. I was weird as a kid, so playing video games, as Dr. Chris said, allowed me to bond with others, with kids that we would get together around the idea of just playing together. So I would say that what I would want people to take away is the idea that media can be complex, and things that can maybe not be perfect can also be okay. So I'd explain. I was just playing a year back a game called Gotham Knights, and the story is a game that revolves around the idea of Batman, and Batman dies, and so his kids need to avenge him. But the game, you can take it as a game that is about violence, which uses violence as a vehicle in order to advance the story, but it's also a game about grief. And for me, especially after losing my grandfather, I feel that the game allowed me to process a lot of the stuff that I hadn't necessarily been able to unpack. So I think that when we talk about media nowadays, I think we need to think of the ideal utopian version of the media that we would want and work towards that. But at the same time, it can be okay at times to have something that is imperfect, and for us to be able to work around the imperfect. Because what we need is, rather than imagine the game that Equimundo would want to create, have the game that the kids are actually wanting to play and be able to meet them where they're at.
Love that.
I just to kick in, I do think it's really important to point out, for example, to Jose's point, the number of kids who get together to play Fortnite, and what they don't do is fight each other. What they do is have dance parties. Yeah. Like, I think there's something to be said for using the available tools in ways that are, again, transgressive.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Like, I have a 17-year-old. It's a daughter, but she has lots of guy friends, and they build worlds, and they do all of kind of adventures through worlds. That kind of creative play I love. And it's, she's screaming because they're going through all these different things. It's fun, and I think that's great community too. All right. Michael, do you want to answer the question? Your final insight, parting knowledge.
Many things I could say, but I'm going to pick up on what Dr. Bell was talking about briefly just a bit ago. I think that what's really moving to me to see, and I get to see a lot of it presently, is young men expressing caring for each other. Being willing to go to the edge and do what they can to help each other out, have each other's backs, whether it's in sports context or, movie context like Saving Private Ryan. There's something about that young men understand about being 100% for each other that I think is a really lovely quality in manhood generally.
Love that. Kevin, Kareem, who wants to go next?
So I'll go. I want to extend or paraphrase a quote by Lorraine Hansberry. Quotes says, "I believe that one of the most important or the most sound ideas in dramatic writing is that in order to create something universal, you have to pay attention to the very specific." And so I want to adjust that a bit and say, creating children's content can be universal, but the authenticity is in the nuance and the specificity. And so that's what we need to get to make sure that we're creating content that is authentic to boys, authentic to girls, and authentic to young people in general.
Love that. All right, Derek, then Kareem. Yeah?
Yeah. I just want to say amen to what Dr. Clark said. When I was at Disney, when I was head of consumer digital products for Disney Interactive, I always made sure that we had a pink path, a blue path, and a purple path, so that there was a path for every kid. And I think that was a great example of doing that. I think my big insight is that we need to give boys more permission to show their feelings, to learn how to regulate their emotions. I think that's something that children's media could do a better job at doing. We have this trope in a lot of teen content where the boy is in love with a girl or a boy and they get rejected. And instead of going, okay, I got rejected, let me, process this. It's, you need to go do a grand gesture to win that person instead of just taking the loss. I met last week with an indie filmmaker named Scott Harris, who's working on a documentary on that topic of boys and rejection and how the film and media portray that sort of thing. So, boys deserve more, and let boys be messy.
Love that. Kareem?
So one of the things that's resonated with me is listening to Jose think about himself, and he said it twice. I was weird. And I was weird too, bruh, like on the same vibe. And one of the things that is important is making sure that we don't consistently classify one type of boy. So growing up as a Black boy, I didn't get to see myself in Zach Morris. Growing up as a Black boy, I didn't get to see myself in the Wonder Years, right? So we sometimes wax poetic about what it means to look at children's media or just media. And there has been spaces for boys and the conversations for boys to develop. But for me, the little Kareem didn't get that opportunity. And I had to find my way across all types of media. So I developed and built a Black male animation program. And it's very clear for me in this program of creating a platform that opens up an opportunity for more different kinds of boys to be able to diversify, not only with language and lived experiences, but their own expressions that they can also look back on one day and say, you know what, I added to the larger discourse. And I think that's the most important thing, is that we have to open up this tent, right? Dr. Clark framed it this way. We got to open things up and let different folks be in the space and have this diverse conversation of what representation, and be very clear that it's not one person who gets to tell all of our stories, but it's multiple people who have these expertise, these lived experiences, this language, these interactivities, to be able to sit in those rooms, feel like they belong, and then go about the business of sharing different stories, different frameworks of what it is to be a boy.
I love that. Love. All right. Well, we are out of time, but an enormously big thanks to all of you guys today. So many takeaways. We will have to do some kind of summary, Eva, of all the insights that we've shared tonight. But I love all of your stories. I love all of your work. And we just are incredibly grateful to have all of you speaking on this topic tonight. We really, really appreciate it. And to everyone who joined us, thank you. There will be more to come because we just got way too excited about this topic, and we'll figure out what we do next. But thank you for joining us.